we're not very good at scaling our ethics with our technology, which is really inconvenient. Hello, my fellow avid readers. Welcome to Read Between the Lines, where we take you behind the cover and between the lines of our favorite books, and we hope yours too. Today, we're talking about Where's My Flying Car, a futurism novel by J. Story Hall, which we have some strong opinions about, but we'll get into those a little bit later. And speaking of we, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Squid from the Depths. Key, Squid, why don't you tell him hello?
Happy to be here. Excited to talk about this book.
I'm excited too. I think that it's different than a lot of the books we've had, mostly because both of us have had a visceral reaction to some of his. I don't know. That's not fair. We had
Well, that's
a
fair because
lot.
I feel like most of the time it's either one of us likes the book, the other one hates it, or we're both pretty neutral about it, or we both kind of love it, and that's not the case for this one at all.
Before we get into it, so you chose this book, and I think I know the answer, but do you mind sharing with the audience how we ended up reading this book?
So I'll be honest, the cover art is beautiful. Like wow, like whatever graphics team put this book together, they did a great job. Because the book on the shelf looks like I want to figure out what that book is about. And then also the description is very telling. It's very intriguing. Um, but I didn't really follow through on it. It's a bit of a random choice.
If I remember correctly, because we were discussing what books we should do next week, and you told me, you know what, let me plan a little bit more this time, because last time I randomly chose a book from my shelf, and that's how we ended up with Where's My Flying Car.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree. I think read this book if you are the kind of person that likes deep speculation about possible futures and the tone of a professor who got his funding pulled, because that's definitely the vibe that I got from this whole book. I always think when I'm starting to give a negative review, and heads up, spoiler alert, this will be a pretty heavily skewing towards negative review of this book. I'm always worried of like, what if they see this? What if of the 10 people that watch this show, someone knows the author and sends it to him? And I'm like, well, if I get eviscerated by this man, I guess I'm just gonna have to deal with that.
Yeah,
But
but to be fair, is I do have a real appreciation for the work that went into building this book because his sources and references and information he pulls are really well put together, right? He did a really good job of going through and getting his numbers and stuff and that kind of thing.
I think that's the hardest thing about giving him a negative review, is saying like,
Yeah.
is seeing all the work he put in, and then being like, I is it because I'm not a scientist? Is it because I'm not a sciencey person? I'm a dumb theater person, so I don't really get all of the technological kind of advances that he has this dream vision of,
I mean,
or
I'm a sciencey person. Like I suppose I'm a sciencey person. All signs point to it. And I don't know. It's how his tone lapses in and out of like it doesn't stay true. Like his is interesting from a pretty technical perspective. He gets going, and you're like, okay, I'm vibing with this. Yeah, tell me about some cool shit, and then he gets on a rant
mm,
for like a page and a half, right? And if he had
yeah.
exercised a little more restraint, I think on getting into those rants, I think the value of this book would have been able to really support the work he did on pulling together his research much more accurately.
I completely agree. I think his tone ruined it for me. It was this tone of derision towards what we've accomplished and a lack of gratitude for the growth that we've had, because he was so focused on what we didn't.
Yeah,
He discounted the benefits of the technological advances we've had in telecommunication and what he deemed as low energy pursuits, and he like almost demonized them. Like, how dare you take the research and the time and the effort away from more worthy pursuits like a flying car. I do think he made great points about how like regulation and external factors played into why we don't have a
Absolutely.
flying car. Like I think those are really cool. I think we should start off by kind of going into what was the most surprising thing to you, Squid, about his analysis on why we don't have a flying car?
Two different things here. My most surprising thing about this book, and as far as why we don't have a flying car, was how much of this book is actually about where is my flying car? Because I was under the impression it was here's like a particular technology that sounds really interesting that we'd all love to have. Let's explore why technology doesn't evolve. That's what I expected from this book, and that's what I expected from reading the summary online and stuff before you started reading it. But in reality, this book is actually primarily about where's the flying car, which is fine. All right, cool. I mean, he was honest about it. Where's the flying? That's the title, right? It checks out. The most surprising thing about it, in retrospect, is also the most like, duh, is how the regulation killed it. How the regulation killed it, and then he followed it up with how the deregulation of the aviation industry in the 1970s saved that industry. Yeah, so I did not know that before we read this book that in the so you know you had the development of commercial aviation happening after World War II from like 1950s onwards up to 1970, right? And during that time period, it was very much a rich man's game, right? You only flew anywhere if you were particularly wealthy, right? Because the cost of the ticket was intense, and that became more and more true on into the 1970s because industry, instead of getting cheaper and cheaper as they got better and better at it, because that's what they were doing, right? In 1950s, they were like, I don't know what is going on here. Getting this plane, sure, we'll go. As they got better and better at it, you would have thought costs would go lower because they're naturally getting better at managing these flights and that kind of thing. But the opposite was occurring because increasing federal aviation regulation was really driving cost up for the commercial airline industry. It's frustrating, but also it makes sense, right? Because when you consider what the role of government is, the role of government is to protect the little person, the regular person,
I'm
your little team
significant,
boy,
Squid.
your little
I
team boy.
matter. I'm important.
Is to protect the little guy, right? From things happening to them outside of his control. That's bad. And the airplane you go crashing on to go on your honeymoon is something that's pretty shitty, right?
Mhm.
And so the government, yeah, had a rightful, pull or push would be better phrasing, to get after that regulation, which makes sense, except the bit where it made flying restrictive, right, and cost too much.
Yeah.
And then in the 1970s, people are like, "Holy shit! Okay, flying's becoming untenable at this point," and so they broke up the regulation and deregulated it substantially, and let competition be the major driver outside of I think pure safety for what was required from an airline's point of view, right?
And
And
it's
it's ended up doing what there is did what to the airline industry what we have now, where we have the cheapest, like adjusted to inflation, flight costs that have ever existed.
it's weird that we have this mental image in our head that cars and trains are safer because it's like, oh, it's on the ground, like it's not going to fall out. There's so much more happening
And
on the ground.
he gets into that
Yeah.
how humans have evolved to navigate a 2D plane as their primary movement axis, right? And so that the having the 3D movement in a plane is unnatural for folks to like be able to just grasp easily, which makes sense, right? So that's probably why we see the ground transportation safer, even though supposedly it's not percentage wise. But anyway, pulling it back into flying cars, uh, the same regulation that was strangling the aviation industry um, prevented the flying car industry from ever getting off the ground. Regulation actually literally killed it, like the FAA or I guess the FAA as a baby killed it.
I get so frustrated with this because I am a drone pilot and I understand like the regulation that FAA does. And
Oh,
to hear him talk about how the FAA literally nixed the flying car because they couldn't handle the traffic made me furious. To
well,
think
the worst thing about it is it's not even they couldn't handle the traffic because they didn't want to try to handle the traffic.
that, and that's what makes me so mad, is this idea that like you are the FAA. This is your job. This is what you do. This is
Mhm.
like what you're supposed to be responsible for. And you were just like, we don't want to hire more people. We don't want to have to go through like this. Yeah, this would be a major innovation to expansion of humanity, but That's just a lot of work. We'd have to figure
No,
out
dude,
new.
but it's worse than that though, man. Because back then, back in like the 50s and 60s and shit, when these agencies were just being created, it wasn't, hey, there's this existing industry that's huge. Like, all right, so imagine like FAA now, right? How much power the FAA has now, right? Purely as like a regulatory thing now. It's like, yeah, if you heard the FAA was like driving consumer policy, you'd be like, what the fuck, FAA? Like, just tell my planes where to land. That's it, right? But like back then, at the the beginning of this as aviation industry getting huge and everything, the FAA was like a significant actor in forming the industry, right? So not only were they like picking the direction they wanted to go in by favoring one, they were also shitting other directions for it to go.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. All right, Squid. Out of all of the dreams that this guy kind of painted of, new technology and futurism, which technological advancement were you most excited for and would you most like to have come to reality?
Good question, man. I don't know. The first question thing is he's not very specific in general at all, right? So
Except
um
about the flying car.
subject, but he's very specific about the flying car, which is
Very
nice. I
specific.
like I like how he does that. He's like very general for a couple chapters, and then he gets very specific about the car. So I respect that. I like the fusion stuff.
Yeah, I
Uh,
thought you might.
yeah, I like the fusion power stuff. As a little note to folks who haven't read the book, Jay Storrs Hall is a nanotech expert. Has been pushing for the adoption of nanotech for years and years and years since like since like the 90s, I think was when he started working. Maybe even sooner than that. So his general ethos, his general point about any technology that we lack currently is, hey, but if we had nanotech, we could do it in 10 years. Uh, which is just fun. I love how easy he says that every time he uses it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, every time there's an issue, it's like we could solve this with nanotech. If we
every
had
time it's like
nanotech, this would be
every time it's like
possible.
we don't really have the material science capabilities to support fusion power generation right now. But if we had nanotech, we sure would, and we did get it done in 10 years. And this is what we would do with fusion. And it's like a little simple. And so that's my issue with his point, his discussion about fusion is it's predicated on being supported by nanotechnology.
Well, that and the whole feeling throughout the book that it was a entrepreneur scientist trying to make the best case possible for his company of nanotech is the future, nanotech is the way, nanotech needs the funding. The things that I'm working on are important, and stop putting money towards things that I don't think are important. And I feel like all that over and over and over it was nanotech is the solution, which it very well might be, but he very glossed over like this is how we would do nanotech. There seems to be a jump that he makes every time he comes to nanotech of I explained it in this one chapter of how nanotech works and could work and is viable, so I'm not really going to explain and say, hey, this would work, this would be fine.
In the author's defense, he does have a book on it separately that's solely about nanotech and how to get it to where it needs to be. And I think his point about the nanotech thing is that no one's given it a serious try. I mean, because like intuitively, it does make sense. It's like, okay, build a machine that can build the same machine as itself, just half the size, and then you do that long enough, and you get little teeny shit, little teeny things making little teenier things.
Maybe I'm wrong. You know what? And you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and just put it out there that this is speculative, but I will say that as you half something, it doesn't become twice as difficult or even like to make it. Yeah, it's exponentially more difficult because when you start working at smaller and smaller sizes, you're working with yeah, and yeah, maybe I just don't have the dream and the vision this guy does, but I imagine that what he's talking about is essentially alchemy, like changing the very molecular and atomic structure of something. And we've been promised the ability to turn iron into gold for centuries, and it's always been, a hack. And so until there's like a viable example of how this stuff works, I'm just very hesitant and very doubtful. And I'm the reason his stuff doesn't work. I'm the reason his stuff can't get funding because people like me that are just like, meh, it just seems hokey. It just sounds hokey. Like and maybe I think you're right. I think if I was willing to, reading his book on nanotech might make the difference.
Yeah, but I'm not willing to read his book on nanotech. if so much of his tone got through on this one, I can only imagine how much through got on his Nanotech exclusive book, right? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I think it'd be really interesting to see the Nanotech stuff. But fusion was definitely my most interesting technology. The
that's
whole
fair.
book, energy is shit.
Yeah, that's where I think we need to make the most advancement. Like, is our process of energy, and with that, my favorite climate control that he talked about of surrounding,
Out of like little teeny balloon things.
yeah, the like little teeny almost like mirror balloon, like essentially climate controlled
Earth.
devices that would be so spread out. I would be worried that you would kind of, yeah, they would be too small to see, but at the same time, like atoms are too small to see, but once you get enough of them, like then we can start to perceive them. I
Yeah.
feel like you would look in, I would be worried that you'd look into the sky and you'd be like, something's just off. Something just isn't quite right.
I saw a headline the other day, one of the Reddit pages on like futurism or like space technology or something like that about space billboards, and I cannot imagine more egregious breach of like etiquette than that.
Yeah. Oh God, that would be awful. Oh, that would be so,
Up
that
at
would make
night,
me
there's a
so sad.
sorry, excuse me, like there's a billboard hanging up there. What?
I think that would
Jeez.
get taken down. Like not by any government. It would just be like I feel like people would band together and make a rocket and just say nope.
And so, have you ever been seen an ad and you've been like, I hate that ad so much, I'm not going to buy what it's trying to sell me.
I
Like I'm going to go out of
I
my way
might
not
have
to do
liked
it.
the product, but I
Yeah.
hate the fact that that ad is there, and I don't want to
Mhm.
support the fact that it is there, so I won't buy. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I feel like that would happen on a pretty intense scale if you put a space billboard up.
Agreed. Moving on, next question, and we're gonna actually get into the end of this one. I'm gonna keep this video a little short. In your opinion, what invention that he mentioned that about the future and created is the most terrifying to you if it became a reality?
First of all, I love when you ask a question and it starts with, in my opinion, because I feel like it's just getting ready to hedge some stuff. But nanotechnology, really, man. Like,
Really, that's what you're most scared of?
yeah, dude, you could eat anything you wanted to eat, like literally anything. Like if you said, okay, I want to remove this city, sure.
Oh,
Like,
create nanotech that turns steel into water, and then next thing you know, a city is just an ocean.
well, I don't know if we can do that because the degree he was talking about wasn't like sub nuclear. It was just like at the atomic scale. But yeah, or like turn it to steel dust at the atomic scale, right?
Did you see that movie GI Joe? That like the most recent one.
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, that was essentially the plot
Oh
of that
yeah,
movie.
with the rockets thing where they shot the rocket at the Eiffel Tower and ate it with all the corrosive nonsense.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
Yes, dude.
But it wasn't corrosive. It wasn't corrosive though. It was green. It was weird that they made it green,
Yeah,
because it
because it was
wasn't
a
corrosive. It was nanotech.
yeah.
Yeah,
That was cool. I did like that.
yeah. That's kind of exactly what you're talking about.
Also, I don't think that's the most recent GI Joe movie.
Is it not?
I
Gosh.
bet I bet they come out with more
Yeah,
ones
they
then.
probably came out with more. But I thought you meant that you were scared because you said it could eat anything, and I misheard you and thought you said like we could eat anything, because he does talk a little bit about the application of you could turn anything into the food that you want, like it would be readily available. You structure it into whatever, and so I thought you were like that scares you because it would be so readily available. All any food you wanted that it would
You
be
have so poor self control, Drake. Come on, man.
no self control. Anytime you want, you could eat ice cream, and that's just too much power for
Too
one
much power
person
for
to
me to handle.
have. I can see the fear for both those things. My fear would be what was also my favorite invention was the climate control, because the idea that you could harness the energy of the sun at a perfect level and cool any part of the world and heat any part of the world as it is needed is awesome, because hey, do we need to heat the world up because our crops can't survive? Do we need to cool it down because it's warm? Incredible. But that also means that in the wrong hands, you could freeze everyone, or specifically someone. Just
Well,
one country says, you're kind of annoying me. winter for 40 years. You don't get to grow food. And
So,
he actually even mentioned
like,
that.
how do you ethically run the controls of that kind of thing, right? And then the follow-on version of that, if you remember, Drake, was a more advanced version of it with focusing ability for like extra mirrors and stuff.
Yeah,
You could literally make a laser with what the sun that hits the earth, right? And he was saying you could like blow up a moon with it if you wanted to. Like
that's
what?
terrifying. That's terrifying. That Justice League, that is literally the plot of Justice League where Batman has a laser and that's pointed at Earth and everyone gets upset, and that's exactly why of who gets to control that kind of power.
See,
And
I didn't know that. That's bad news.
that, yeah,
Spoiler.
bad news.
Wait, the new one with the Snyder cut and everything?
Oh, no. This was like this was Justice League the animated version.
Oh, well, that's probably more culturally relevant.
So that was yeah, that was the one that I'm most terrified of, because I feel like kind of what you just said, it's so versatile that like, and because the development of it is would be so crucial to our ability to control like climate of our little rock, that little spaceship that we call a rock, or a rock we call a spaceship or a planet. um it would be so critical to it, but at the same time it would probably be developed with military intent in mind. The only way we get that kind of funding, that's a little terrifying. Like, whatever country gets it first just gets to say, we decide how the world runs now. We decide what direction we want it to be hot, we want it to be cold. We have the controls. That's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
But that's why the United States has the power they do now, because they did that in the 1940s with the
Yeah.
bomb.
Roy Jasper makes a good point. I won't say your real name because we're live, but good to see you, my friend. Roy Jasper makes a good point. Isn't that the problem with all big technological development? Can't let fear stop development, only prepare for it.
Thank
But
you so much for saying that, Mr. Jasper. Jeez Louise. Because that's something I want to discuss here before we get off this book, Drake.
yes,
Is that so this guy has tons of points that I think are very personal to him that definitely took a tone that was overly personal for the kind of book he's writing here. But he has tons of other points that I really like and resonate with that are true, and I wish weren't in a book with other things that really dilute the effectiveness of them. And his point that I like the most is humans' fear of higher energy technology, right? Because like Mr. Jasper is saying there, the higher the energy of technology, the more risky it is in terms of if it's used poorly, right?
yeah,
Not even assuming it works and doesn't break, right? The risk of a high energy technology, you know, breaking down, something tragic happening, literally from it breaking, is higher. Let alone the issue of like if it's run from an unethical point of view and that kind of stuff, right? Which is really really accurate. But his point here is that if we're too afraid of it for too long, we literally just deny ourselves a significant chunk of what humans can achieve as a society functioning as a species, right? I can't begin to guess how like that should be the prime management approach to that kind of thing, right? But I feel like if you just give up on those technologies, because like yeah, that's gonna be a complicated issue to solve, then you're really missing out on a lot of function, like so of what you could get, like
well,
because
and
some of the technologies here
we get
drive sound
scared.
fantastic.
We get scared really easily. Not easily, but I mean, look at Chernobyl. Chernobyl had this massive problem, and we've been terrified of nuclear energy ever since. It's taken us decades to even start to get back to it, even though they've prepped for it, they've prepared for it, they've made the plants safer, and like where that won't happen again. And
Do you
it's
remember the
still
section
people
in
people are
on
traumatic about it.
Fukushima?
Go ahead.
Do you remember the section on Fukushima here in this book? So about how the radiation leak from the Fukushima nuclear reactor thing to the surrounding area was as high as the background radiation in Norway.
Yeah, yeah. But all it took was us getting
Excuse me?
scared. All it took was us
Like,
getting scared. Like, we're just scared of high energy because yeah, we've made huge advancements in personal computing technology and telecommunication. You can't really destroy a city with a cell phone. But I will say, like, even look at how the telecommunication, like the advancements in telecommunication technology have caused problems. You know what I mean? Like, with we can now communicate on such a global scale, and misinformation has become this huge ethical problem we're not good at dealing with like advancing technology and coming up with regulations and how we should behave. Like we're not very good at scaling our ethics with our technology, which is really inconvenient.
But it's like, so it's very funny that we got back around to the regulation thing, because earlier in the discussion we were talking about, yeah, regulation is really strangling all these industries, right? But it's like, okay, well, what do you do? Do you overly regulate it so that it doesn't end up as in some kind of dystopia? Or like, how do you hit that sweet spot where you regulate it enough so you don't have like vast percentage of the population being taken advantage of, but you still get to figure out these technologies?
Yeah.
It's a hard question.
It is a hard question, and it is one we will leave up to our wonderful viewers to ponder and leave comments and discuss below. For now, we're going to wrap up our discussion of Where's My Flying Car? I did not enjoy this book. It was ruined by a tone that could have been a lot more positive and a lot more focused on the positives, but chose to focus on all the negatives. And it was really disappointing approach because he really did an incredible job at sourcing both science fiction to talk about the future we were promised and the actual real life implications. So I feel like if you just focused on the positive and not as much on the negative, that we really could have come out with a much better book. But me personally, I did not enjoy it. Squid, why don't you give us a couple last words and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Drake. It is a chance to be a really good book, spoiled by his approach to it, right? Um, I think the best way to sum it up is it reads exactly like a disgruntled college professor who got his funding pulled went to write a book instead. Like literally, it reads like a guy, really cool, like top of the line researcher was writing a book. He was writing for 20 years, doing a bunch of research to write it. Right, he had all this good data, and then his funding got pulled 18 months before he finished the book, when he had to tie it together and put all the connecting paragraphs in. And this is what the result is. Like, that's what it feels like to me.
Hope you enjoyed our analysis and thoughts on Where's My Flying Car by J. Story Hall. If you have any opinions on this book, if you've read it, or just on what we've spoken about today, please leave in the comments down below. While you're there, give us a like. And if you like the content, please go ahead and subscribe. We do host a live book club on the final Saturday of every month. That is over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Drac_OB or Dracob. And I would love to have you there live. I do my best to respond in the chat while people are here, and then we post these usually about every other week. So stay tuned, and we'll keep taking you behind the cover and between the lines of your favorite books. Until next time, this is Drake with Squid from the Deep Inky Depths Key, signing off.